Benjamin Franklin was a polymath. He was a businessman, inventor, scientist, diplomat, statesman, author, and so on. What can we learn from a man like him? Well, it turns out a lot. In this video, we will combine his wisdom with small anecdotes from his life. The video is structured in 5 parts, which are roughly chronologically according to his life. Still, every chapter can be taken by itself, so skip freely to what interests you the most. His whole life, especially in his early life, Benjamin Franklin was focused on improving himself, his character, and his principles. From an early life, Benjamin Franklin was interested in books and everything related to them, like reading them, writing by oneself, and learning from them. From a child, I was fond of reading, and all the little money that came into my hands was ever laid out in books. Every book he could get his hand on, like those in his father's little library, he read. At this time, mostly theological and history books. Books that had the most influence on him, as he says, are Plutarch's Life, Cotton Mather's Essays to the Good, and John Bunyan's Pilgrim's Progress. At the end of this video, you will find a book list, including those Benjamin Franklin talked about and recommended. When Franklin got apprenticed at 12 years old under his older brother James in the printing business, he made the following remark. I now had access to better books. An acquaintance with the apprentices of booksellers enabled me sometimes to borrow a small one, which I was careful to return soon and clean. Often I sat up in my room, reading the greatest part of the night. He used literally every opportunity to borrow books or buy books or in some way or another get his hands on some new books. And he used every free minute to read them. A general advice on reading by Franklin. Read much, but not many books. After some time in his brother's business, he not just read a lot, but also he started to write. And he started to write for his brother's newspaper, and he wrote anonymous articles under the pseudonym Silence Do Good. If you would not be forgotten as soon as you are dead and rotten, either write things worth reading or do things worth the writing. To improve his writing, he used an imitation technique about which we will talk in the next chapter. Moving now from the topic of writing to the topic of learning and self-study, which were main pillars of his life. Because Benjamin Franklin was mostly self-taught. He had only 2 years of formal education, so he somehow had to make up for it. In later years, he helped to establish a public library, about which we will also come back to in a later chapter. But for now, it's important that he self-taught him a lot, and also that learning was always accompanying him through his whole life. This library afforded me the means of improvement by constant study, for which I set apart an hour or 2 each day, and thus repaired in some degree the loss of the learned education my father once intended for me. Reading was the only amusement I allowed myself. I spent no time in taverns, games, or frolics of any kind. A theme that we can detect here is his focus on reading, writing, and learning in his early life, of course, besides his work. And I can imagine Franklin not so much distracted. Of course, he didn't have so many possibilities or opportunity to be distracted like we have in our modern days, but still, I have always thought that one man of tolerable abilities may work great changes and accomplish great affairs among mankind, if he first forms a good plan and cutting off all amusements or other employments that would divert his attention, make the execution of that same plan his whole study and business. How he improved his writing? With an imitation technique. In his teenage years, he had arguments with a bookish friend of his about all kinds of topics. His father discovered the letters they were exchanging and gave the comment that Franklin was better in grammar, but way worse in elegance of expression. He took a writing that he liked. He made key points to every sentence in the text. Those key points he put some days away, and after some days he tried to reconstruct the text only by the keywords. And then he reflected and looked at where he made faults and could improve. Through this method of imitation, he learned to better write. Moving from the improvement of his mind to the improvement of his character. Benjamin Franklin was a man of principles. There were some principles he coined essential for the success of his life, and he also recommended that people follow them. I grew convinced that truth, sincerity, and integrity in dealings between man and man were of the utmost importance to the felicity of life, and I formed written resolutions, which still remain in my journal book, to practice them ever while I lived. Basically, what he means is that we should strive for virtue, and that virtue is of high importance to every human being. It is said that the Persians in the ancient constitution had public schools in which virtue was taught as a liberal art or science, and it is certainly of more consequence to a man that he has learned to govern his passions, in spite of temptation to be just in his dealings, to be temperate in his pleasures, to support himself with fortitude under his misfortunes, to behave with prudence in all affairs and in every circumstance of life. I say it is of much more real advantage to him to be thus qualified than to be a master of all the arts and sciences in the world beside. What are we normally striving for? To to be rich, to be powerful, to look good, to be learned. Considering all of this, nothing is worth anything compared to striving for virtue. Almost every man has a strong natural desire of being valued and esteemed by the rest of his species. But I am concerned and grieved to see how few fall into the right and only infallible method of becoming so. That laudable ambition is too commonly misapplied and often ill-employed. Some, to make themselves considerable, pursue learning. Others grasp at wealth. Some aim at being thought witty, and others are only careful to make the most of an handsome person. But what is wit or wealth or form or learning when compared with virtue? This is true, we love the handsome, we applaud the learned, and we fear the rich and powerful. But we even worship and adore the virtuous. Nor is it strange, since men of virtue are so rare, so very rare to be found. If we were as industrious to become good as to make ourselves great, we should become really great by being good, and the number of valuable men would be much increased. But it is a grand mistake to think of being great without goodness. The key point of Franklin is that we want to strive for greatness, and this is good. But the problem is just that we want to strive for this greatness by being wealthy or looking good or being extremely learned or being extremely powerful or rich or whatever. And he said this is the wrong way to do it. He said when we want to strive to greatness, we should do it by striving for doing good to others. In a letter to his parents, who were worried that he didn't practice enough religion, he wrote, "I think, vital religion has always suffered when orthodoxy is more regarded than virtue. And the scripture assures me that at the last day we shall not be examined what we thought, but what we did. And our recommendation will not be that we said, Lord, Lord, but that we did good to our fellow creatures." He was raised a Presbyterian and had his problems with religion, especially with the dogma and some other things. Still, he was not without it. "I never was without some religious principles. I never doubted, for instance, the existence of the deity, that he made the world and governed it by his providence, that the most acceptable service of God was the doing good to man, that our souls are immortal, and that all crime will be punished and virtue rewarded either here or hereafter." The doing good to others is a basic belief which followed Benjamin Franklin throughout his whole life. In my opinion, that was probably his little bit meaning in life, or the mission of his life, to do good to others. When Franklin was 25, he started the project to attain moral perfection. That means to live without any fault. The theory behind it. As I knew, or thought I knew, what was right and wrong, I did not see why I might not always do the one and avoid the other. The difficulties. While my attention was taken up, care was employed in guarding against one fault. I was often surprised by another. Habit took the advantage of inattention. Inclination was sometimes too strong for reason. I concluded at length that the mere speculative conviction that it was our interest to be completely virtuous was not sufficient to prevent our slipping, and that the contrary habits must be broken and good ones acquired and established. So that means, while we have some goal, this is good, but it's not enough. Bad habits destroy us over time. That's why he used the following method. First, make a list of all the virtues you want to acquire. Second, focus on one at a time and try to make them a habit. Pursuing many at the same time will give us difficulties, as seen in the quote before. Third, when we master one virtue, go to the next. What we can do is to create a little book with all the virtues. The goal is to have in the week we focus on virtue 1, no point. The point indicates a fault of a virtue. At each day in the evening, we reflect on all the virtues and give points where we made a fault. And the most important virtue is the virtue from this week. And we really try to only focus on this virtue in the week and have there no point. We can build, of course, our own list, adapting his, making additions or subtractions according to our own principles. His conclusion of his project. But on the whole, though I never arrived at the perfection I had been so ambitious of obtaining, but fell far short of it, yet I was by the endeavor made a better and a happier man than I otherwise should have been if I had not attempted it. In combination with the just mentioned project of moral perfection, he wrote down his daily plan. What we can see in both the morning and evening, he asked himself the question about doing good. That daily reflection on the meaning of his life, which supports my interpretation. He woke up early and went early to bed. Early to bed and early to rise makes a man healthy, wealthy and wise. In the evening, he had his examination of the day, which was probably the reflection on the strive for moral perfection and in general what happened in the day. At the age of 23, Franklin joined the local politics in Philadelphia, and we can only imagine how his ability to have conversations with others helped him in local politics and also later in his task as a diplomat in England and France. Many things we just talked about in the first chapter, like reading, we can find for him to be useful in his conversations. My mind having been much more improved by reading than Keimer's arrival in the printing business, I suppose it was for that reason my conversation seemed to be more valued. On top of that, he had a character which was at ease and charming. He had the happy talent of being at ease in almost any company, from scrappy tradesmen to wealthy merchants, scholars to rogues. His most notable trait was a personal magnetism. He attracted people who wanted to help him. We talked about his ability to self-educate. When he came by the Socratic method, the method of inquiry, it changed the style of words and how he went into an argument, dropped my abrupt contradiction and positive argumentation, and put on the humble inquirer and doubter. The Socratic method, used by Socrates, is basically to ask more questions to a given answer to figure out underlying beliefs. So we take nothing at face value. We could ask the question why ad infinitum. The goal is to uncover the truth, so to speak, and make us aware of areas where we are ignorant and uncertain. From the Socratic method, Franklin kept the habit of expressing himself not with the words certainly, undoubtedly, or any others that gives the air of positiveness to an opinion, but rather say, I conceive, or I apprehend a thing to be so or so, it appears to me, or I think it is so, or so for such and such reasons, or I imagine to be so, or it is so if I am not mistaken. This habit, I believe, has been of great advantage. What is positiveness? It is to talk with 100% certainty, and exactly this he laid down. Talk with more careful words. I would say that doesn't mean we aren't standing behind our point of opinion, which we think is true. We are, first, making space for error on our side, and second, taking the harshness of our opinion. Compare that. I know for sure that X and Y are connected, or it appears to me that there is a connection between X and Y, but I could be mistaken. In general, as he became more successful in being a public person, he attracted ultimately more envy. After one of his public projects got successful, he wrote, "The impropriety of presenting oneself as a proposer of any useful project that might be supposed to raise one's reputation in the smallest degree above that of one's neighbors when one has need of their assistance to accomplish that project. I therefore put myself as much as I could out of sight, and stated it as a schema of a number of friends who had requested me to go about and propose it to such as they thought lovers of reading. In this way my affair went on more smoothly, and I ever practiced it on such occasions, and from my frequent successes can hardly recommend it. The present little sacrifice of our vanity will afterwards be amply repaid." It is incredible that he didn't have so many enemies, considering his high positions, especially later in life. Of course he had some, but not many. A secret to being more revered than resented, he learned, was to display, at least when he could master the discipline, a self-depreciating humor, unpretentious demeanor, and unaggressive style in conversation. I would argue that probably the Socratic method helped him to make his style of conversation less aggressive. Around the age of 20, he formed in Philadelphia an intellectual club with other young tradesmen, and the goal was to mutual self-improve. The club continued almost 40 years, and in Franklin's words, was the best school of philosophy, morals and politics that then existed in the province. A club where like-minded people could meet and discuss their ideas. It helped Franklin a lot in his later life. What were the rules of this club? The rules I drew up required that every member in his turn should produce one or more queries on any point of morals, politics or natural philosophy to be discussed by the company, and once in 3 months produce and read an essay of his own writing on any subject he pleased. Our debates were to be under the direction of a president, and to be conducted in sincere spirit of inquiry after truth, without fondness of dispute or desire of victory, and to prevent worms. All expressions of positiveness in opinion or of direct contradiction were after some time made contraband and prohibited under small pecuniary penalties. In the rules we can see the Socratic method indirectly. It is about inquiring for truth and critical thinking. A conversation is not only about the times when both sides agree, it is also about the times when both sides disagree. And Franklin made it a habit of his to not go strongly into a dispute. Even if you're good in disputing, it is not worth in the long run. People good at disputing get victory sometimes, but they never get goodwill, which would be of more use to them. I made it a rule to forbear all direct contradiction to the sentiments of others, and all positive assertion of my own. When another asserted something that I thought an error, I denied myself the pleasure of contradicting him abruptly and of showing immediately some absurdity in his proposition. And in answering, I began by observing that in certain cases or circumstances his opinion would be right, but that in the present case there appeared or seemed to me some difference. His conclusion to the change. I soon found the advantage of this change in my manners. The conversations I engaged in went on more pleasantly. The modest way in which I proposed my opinions procured them a readier reception and less contradiction. I had less mortification when I was found to be in the wrong, and I more easily prevailed with others to give up their mistakes and join with me when I happened to be in the right. Walter Isaacson, one of Benjamin Franklin's biographers, writes about Franklin that Franklin didn't have many enemies. This is remarkable given his high position in society. One reason could be the use of the Benjamin Franklin effect. The Ben Franklin effect is a psychological effect in which people develop positive feelings when they do a favor to someone. Benjamin Franklin was a member of many city councils in Philadelphia. Though in general he hadn't many rivals, one he had who didn't like him. Now, instead of opposing him, arguing with him and so on, Franklin asked his rival for a favor. Specifically, he asked if he could borrow a rare book from his rival's library. The rival was lending it to Franklin, and Franklin gave it back with a thank you note. After this, he didn't have any problems with his rival, turning from rival to friend, so to speak. Why does the Ben Franklin effect work? Well, the rival agreed to do something good to Franklin to borrow the book. And when we do something good to someone, the label of rival isn't fitting anymore. Why should we do a favor for a rival, right? So in order to stay coherent, we rationalize our actions and have probably even positive feelings for that person. On top, there's reciprocity. I help you, you help me. This also tends to have a positive impact on the relationship between two persons. To end this part, let's look at Benjamin Franklin's opinion on being alone versus being in society. Man is a sociable being, and it is for aught I know one of the worst punishments to be excluded from society. I have read abundance of fine things on the subject of solitude, and I know this is a common boast in the mouths of those that affect it to be thought wise, that they are never less alone than when alone. I acknowledge solitude, an agreeable refreshment to a busy mind, but were the thinking people obliged to be always alone, I am apt to think they would quickly find their very being insupportable to them. Franklin goes on to tell a story. I have heard of a gentleman who underwent 7 years close confinement in the Bastille of Paris. He was a man of sense, he was a thinking man, but being deprived of all conversation, to what purpose should he think? For he was denied even the instruments of expressing his thoughts in writing. There is no burden so grievous to man as his time that he knows not how to dispose of. At the age of around 22, he created his own printing business. He was pretty successful in it, and he could retire early at the age of 42 from active business. There were certain principles that were incremental or essential for his success and for becoming wealthy. Let's start with being industrious and having a good work ethic. But so determined I was to continue a sheet a day of the folio that one night, when having imposed my forms, I thought my day's work over. One of them by accident was broken and 2 pages reduced to pi. I immediately distributed and composed it over again before I went to bed. And this industry, visible to our neighbors, began to give us character and credit. To be industrious and frugal in one's life brought Franklin far. In order to secure my credit and character as a tradesman, I took not only care to be in reality industrious and frugal, but to avoid all appearances of the contrary. I dressed plainly. I was seen at no places of idle diversion. I never went out a-fishing or shooting. The book indeed sometimes debauched me from my work, but that was seldom, snug, and gave no scandal. Today it often feels that it's the other way around, that many worry about also appearance, but without the real work done. Proverb of Solomon: "Cease though a man diligent in his calling, he shall stand before kings, he shall not stand before mean men." I from thence considered industry as a means of obtaining wealth and distinction. The fact is that Franklin literally stand in front of many kings. Franklin now on the difference between leisure and laziness. Leisure is time for doing something useful. This leisure the diligent man will obtain, but the lazy man never. So that a life of leisure and a life of laziness are two things. Let's analyze this a little bit deeper. What exactly is a problem of laziness? Idleness taxes many of us much more if we reckon all that is spent in absolute sloth, or doing of nothing, which that is spent in idle employments or amusements that amount to nothing. Sloth, by bringing on diseases, absolutely shortens life. Sloth, like rust, consumes faster than labor wears. The cure to this is to use our time in a good way, mostly by doing something. Lost time is never found again, and what we call time enough always proves little enough. Let us then up and be doing, and doing to the purpose. So by diligence shall we do more with less perplexity. Sloth makes all things difficult, but industry all easy. Being financially independent at the age of 42, Benjamin Franklin has his take on the topic of money. I experienced too the truth of the observation that after getting the first £100, it is more easy to get the second. He figured out a similar complaint what many people have today, that no one has enough money. The poor have little, beggars none, the rich too much, enough not one. To retire early, he must have had a lot of money, And of course, he had his own printing business, but on top of that, he was also an investor, so to speak. He set up his own workers, like who worked for his own printing business, and enabled them to open their own printing business in other cities. And he said that the success to all of his partnerships was that he had clear, defined rules to them, so there were no quarrels inside them. And the proof is that it works is that mostly all of his partnerships were successful, owing, I think, a good deal to the precaution of having very explicitly settled in our articles everything to be done by or expected from each partner, so that there was nothing to dispute, which precaution I would therefore recommend to all who enter into partnerships, for whatever esteem partners may have for and confidence at each other at the time of the contract. Little jealousies and disgusts may arise with ideas of inequality in the care and burden of the business, which are attended often with breach of friendship and of the connection, with lawsuits and other disagreeable consequences. After retiring from active business at the age of 42, Benjamin Franklin had some free time, and he used his free time to do some scientific experiments. And we have to note here that from a young age he did some tinkering by itself, like he built some little things to help him out. It has ever since been a pleasure to me to see good workmen handle their tools. And it has been useful to me, having learned so much by it, as to be able to do little jobs myself in my house when a workman could not readily be got, and to construct little machines for my experiments, while the intention of the experiment was fresh and warm in my mind. As mentioned in the introduction, Benjamin Franklin was a polymath. One aspect of Franklin's genius was the variety of his interests. From science to government, to diplomacy to journalism, all of them approached from a rather practical rather than theoretical angle. He was also a polymath in the areas of science. So we find Franklin interested in the design of a flexible catheter, in the pattern of movement in hurricanes and waterspouts and whirlwinds, and in arithmetic curiosities called magic squares, just to name a few. But there was one area of science where Franklin went beyond the limits of an amateur interest in science. His research into the nature of electricity really made all subsequent understanding of the phenomena possible. He published papers on his experiments on electricity. An abbé in France was offended because he got another opinion. Instead of some written defense, he wrote nothing and let his experiments stand on its own feet. But on consideration that my writings contain only a description of experiments, which anyone might repeat and verify, and if not to be verified, could not be defended, of observations offered as conjectures and not delivered dogmatically, therefore not laying me under any obligation to defend them. So clever actually. Let the experiment take care of itself. It's science. An experiment has to be repeatable with the same results, so everyone can try it by themselves. If in any case the experiment has different results, provided the experiment is done correctly, then it's wrong. Science is not about the people directly, it's all about reality. Ben Franklin combined theory with practice. From what I interpret of him is that he was extremely curious, like theoretically wise, but at the same time he always looked for the practical implementation, because he wanted to do good to people. The following example showcases his practicality. There was a young priest whose sermons Franklin liked because they were well written and appealed to the virtue of the people. Turned out that the young priest copied those sermons, was highly judged by the people, said this was not acceptable even though the sermons were good. Franklin disagreed with the people and he supported the young priest. I rather approved his giving us good sermon composed by others than bad ones of his own manufacture, though later was the practice of our common teachers. The same practicality, like the practicality of what works and what is good for the people, can be seen in his dealings with patents. He developed an open stove, and it was really a good open stove and a really good development because it has less fuel consumption and make more heat. He was advised to patent this stove. He declined and he responded that as we enjoy great advantages from the invention of others, we should be glad of an opportunity to serve others by any invention of ours, and this we should do freely and generously. In addition to Franklin's practicality, he was able to see the big picture. On a voyage to London on a ship, he made the remark that it is really difficult to improve or in general also build a ship. Why? Because many people who work on the ship have their different expertises, and from their designs in their head it would all look different, because everyone just considers their part, what they are doing, the most important. So no one sees the whole picture, no one sees how it all interconnected and then create design. Everyone just sees their specific picture. One man builds a hull, another rigs her, a third lays and sails her. No one of these has the advantage of knowing all the ideas and experience of the others, and therefore cannot draw just conclusions from a combination of the whole. In the local politics in Philadelphia, he was involved in establishing many good projects which helped a lot of people. Internationally, he was later in his life a diplomat for America in France and England. Not to forget, he was one of the authors of the American Declaration of Independence. On his mission to do good for people, especially those people in Philadelphia and indirectly all America, he, as just said, established many successful public projects. And one of those projects was, as earlier mentioned in the first chapter, was the project of the subscription library. These libraries have improved the general conversation of the Americans, made the common tradesmen and farmers as intelligent as most gentlemen from other countries. Reading became fashionable, and our people, having no public amusements to divert their attention from study, became better acquainted with books, and in a few years were observed by strangers to be better instructed and more intelligent than people of the same rank generally are in other countries. Other projects include the establishment of the Union Fire Company, basically firefighters, of a university, today the University of Pennsylvania, a philosophical society, a hospital for the poor, not his idea but a major contributor, and scavengers in the city, which kept the city clean. Firefighters, a hospital for the poor, a library, and a philosophical society. Okay, but also scavengers? And he said yes, scavengers were really important, because it doesn't matter if people conceive them as probably more like low nature, consider this other project as more high nature. It makes no sense, because he said the scavengers made the dirt away, and the dirt was a always occurring problem. So this repetition of this dirt appearing in the houses or also in the shops made a big problem. So the scavengers solved a really big problem. And also here we can see again his practicality, because it doesn't matter what seemed like probably high nature. It doesn't matter, because also what is low nature is really important, like what we perceive as low nature. There is of course probably nothing like high and low nature, but I hope you get my point. His practicality was what is good, and that is the most important thing. Doesn't matter what other people perceive. Human felicity is produced not so much by great pieces of good fortune that seldom happen, as by little advantages that occur every day. He gives an example of this. If you teach a poor young man to shave himself and keep his razor in order, you may contribute more to the happiness of his life than in giving him a 1,000 guineas. All of these public projects, I would say, mirror his intention to do good for people. And I want to give you one more note here, or one more scenario, where he, or Benjamin Franklin, showed really his skin in the game. Like he was also directly involved in his ideas. There was once a time when Philadelphia was in danger of being attacked, and they built outside of the city a little outpost with some cannons. The people wanted to make him the colonel of the army from Philadelphia, but he declined because he said he's not fit for this. Like he's unfit, like he finds himself unfit, and these other persons are better suited to be this colonel, which is already like a big thing to do, right? But instead of like doing nothing for this, he went to this cannons and made his duty as every other common soldier. And among the rest, I regularly took my turn of duty there as a common soldier. In the politics of Philadelphia, he started small as a clerk, but over time he was appointed to more and more, like being a member of more and more councils. On this he said the following: "And I conceive my becoming a member would enlarge my power of doing good. I would not, however, insinuate that my ambition was not flattered by all these promotions. It certainly was, for considering my low beginning, they were great things to me." Even on the international level of politics, it was really important for him to do good for people. To do good for people for one's country, but also to do good for basically all mankind. That few in public affairs act from a mere view of the good of the country, whatever they may pretend. And so their actings bring real good to their country. Yet men primarily considered that their own and their country's interest was united, and did not act from a principle of benevolence. That fewer still in public affairs act with a view to the good of mankind. For him, as a diplomat on an international level of politics, it was important to continue to do good. At minimum, I would interpret him doing good for the people of one's own country, and even better is to think about doing good for all people, like for all mankind. And he criticizes that many people there in the highest level of politics took probably only interest on their own person and think that they combined it with interest of their country. So this is a little bit like rationalizing their own interests and think their own and the country's interests are combined, which are often, or united, which is of course often not the case. I want to end this video with some words from a biographer of Benjamin Franklin named Carl van Doren. The death of a great man begins another history of his continuing influence, his changing renown, the legend which takes the place of fact. It is meant to make clear that Franklin was not one of these men who owe their greatness merely to the opportunities of the times. In any age, in any place, Franklin would have been great. Mind and will, talent and art, strength and ease, wit and grace, met in him as if nature had been lavish and happy when he was shaped. Let's move now to the topic of book recommendations. So when you only want to read one book about Benjamin Franklin in his own words, I would really recommend you his autobiography and his other writings. This edition is from Oxford World's Classic, and it includes many other writings of his, not just his autobiography. But I would really recommend you that because, in my opinion, there's the most value in. When you are more interested in his whole life and how it also is in international and historical context, I would recommend you these two biographies. This one is by Walter Isaacson, and the other one is by Carl van Doren. Both are really good. This from Carl van Doren is a little bit longer and it shows Franklin much more in his own words. And this from Walter Isaacson is more about Franklin in the international context and also in the historical context, and he gives much more side information also to Franklin's life, or also what happened in his lifetime around him. Both are really good. It depends on what you want to get for information. Before I forget, the 3 books I just showed you are the source material for this video. If you're interested in more videos like this, check out this video or this video. And as always, thank you so much for watching this video and taking your valuable time to watch this video. As always, I also wish you a fantastic day. Wish not so much to live long as to live well.